Speaker, I rise today to reply to the CLP government's budget address. And it is deeply disappointing that the country Liberal government's first budget has once again fallen short of what Territorians deserve and expect from a new government. Madam Speaker, this is a budget that lacks vision, lacks compassion and lacks a commitment to addressing the most pressing issues in our community. Madam Speaker, if it is a genuine concern that the government's most single-minded focus is on a few priorities, cost of living is absolutely critical, then we all must work to address it. But, Madam Speaker, we are seeing in this budget a government that is ignoring environmental protections, ignoring the lived experience of individuals and experts who work in various sectors across the Northern Territory, including the domestic violence sector and the environment. Madam Speaker, through this week, we've heard the government sing the praises of the budget and how it will reduce crime across the Territory so we can have a stronger and safer community. Fair enough, that's what Territorians want, and that's what the opposition wants as well. However, this government, Madam Speaker, has yet to realise that their strategy of arresting and jailing those who commit crime will not yield in those results by itself. We absolutely need to continue to invest in therapeutic solutions. What this budget offers, Madam Speaker, is a band-aid solution to much bigger problems. The Territory will continue to have high rates of crime and domestic violence if we do not invest our money correctly. And this budget shows that the government has no clue when it comes to making those real changes. Madam Speaker, the Northern Territory is plagued by domestic violence. It is a shame. It is an issue that both the opposition and the government want to address and find a solution for. I believe, and I have said in this chamber before, that we should all be doing the work, government, my caucus and the crossbench, to go to Canberra, Madam Speaker, and ask our federal colleagues for the much-needed additional funding to better address domestic and family violence in the Northern Territory. In the last 9 months, Madam Speaker, nearly everyone in this chamber has passionately spoken about the effects of DV and the effects it has on our communities and in their own lives. No one here is immune to the effects of domestic violence. And I will admit, Madam Speaker, that some of the lived experiences and stories from members in this chamber gave me hope that as a group of MLAs, we're all on the same page when it comes to overcoming domestic violence. Now, Madam Speaker, I am happy that after months of deflections from the Minister of the Prevention of Domestic and Family Violence about what this government is doing regarding domestic violence and refusing to talk about the rollout of the funding to the sector, we are seeing where the much-needed funding is going. It is welcome to see that finally money will be going towards DV, services that can breathe a sigh of relief as they're assured funding for another year, so they continue to provide vital services to some of the Territory's most vulnerable. However, Madam Speaker, big questions still remain about how this DV funding has been allocated and how the sector has been included, Madam Speaker. How have they been consulted? The sector has already had its doubts about whether or not these outcomes will achieve the results so desperately needed in this space, given the government has made decisions unilaterally without consulting those on the front lines and the victims themselves. Madam Speaker, late last year, Coroner Elizabeth Armitage, after nearly a year of investigating the deaths of Kaman Rabanja, Kumanjay Haywood, Ms Farooq and Ms Unipingu, presented her findings to the public about how the government and DV sector can work together to make real and lasting changes when it comes to reducing the rates of domestic and family violence in the Territory. Coroner Armitage gave government a roadmap of what needs to be done to start making real changes in domestic violence here in the Northern Territory. Unfortunately, the government has chosen to not follow that roadmap entirely. They have invested in some measures that address the Coronial's recommendations, but not all of them have received a budget allocation, Madam Speaker. And the implementation of all of the 35 recommendations is needed if we are to seriously address domestic and family violence in the Territory. So much of the DV money is going to other agencies, like corrections, and while I absolutely support investment into offender rehabilitation, it should be coming from the corrections budget, not taken from services supporting at-risk women and children that are already struggling under the growing number of demand. This is a piecemeal approach. It does not match the scale of the problem or the community's expectations. Madam Speaker, this government says it's focused on early intervention and prevention. We've already heard it every sittings since the CLP came into government. It turns out that they are referring to programs that started under the former government that have been rebranded, for example, the much-spruiked circuit breaker program, which was just the co-responder model by another name. It's unfortunate that they continue to point to this program as a domestic violence success story when it's actually a diversion and supporting young people at risk. Yet the CLP has chosen to invest $6.6 million of DV money into this program. I'm not saying, Madam Speaker, that those kids who go through the circuit program don't need that support, because they do. However, it's coming at the cost of the domestic and family violence sector and the women and families who deserve well-funded frontline services, services that heal the violence of today, as well as stopping the cycle for future generations. Madam Speaker, $36 million into the sector is good, and I thank the government for that contribution. But more thought could have been put into where the money needed to go, making a lasting impact. Madam Speaker, was the DV sector consulted about the DV budget? That is something I'd like to know, and I know that the DSV sector would also like to know. I'd like to also know, Madam Speaker, that the Domestic, Family and Sexual Violence Advisory Group that was axed, perhaps if the forum was part of the DV budget allocation discussions, some thought might have been put into the allocations. Madam Speaker, there is no money in the budget for the establishment of a domestic, family and sexual violence peak body. Again, an important recommendation that has been made, that has been spoken about for some time, an important step to overcoming domestic and family violence. There is no money for the Domestic Violence Death Review, Madam Speaker. Again, another important recommendation that has been ignored by this government. Madam Speaker, this government has repeatedly claimed that their first budget is a law and order budget that tackles the root causes of crime. Yet programs and initiatives that have shown real outcomes in changing behaviours of those caught in the cycle of the justice system have had their funding cut, including the Aboriginal Justice Agreement, which has lost $2 million, Madam Speaker. When we speak about the Aboriginal Justice Agreement, Madam Speaker, and you look at the budget papers, there has been a reduction of $2 million. There is no money in the infrastructure programs to turn over a new alternative to custody facility in the Northern Territory. There is no money to turn over new work camps across the Northern Territory, Madam Speaker. This tells us that this government is not serious about upholding the principles and the values of the Northern Territory's Aboriginal Justice Agreement, Madam Speaker. The cut to funding for the Aboriginal Justice Agreement is a concerning signal from the government about its commitment to justice reform. There is also no funding, as I've said, for alternative to custody facilities or new correctional work camps. This is a slap in the face to the community organisations and advocates who have long championed progressive reform in the justice space. And this shows that this government, the CLP government, has no real plans when it comes to breaking the cycle of crime in the Territory besides locking offenders up. Madam Speaker, a mindset made clear by the Attorney-General this week was when she announced that this government doesn't care about the trauma that jails can cause perpetrators. What this means is she doesn't care that jails further entrench criminal behaviour and keep people in a cycle of reoffending. It's incredibly short-sighted. Madam Speaker, when we talk about the environment, we talk about something that affects the lives of every Territorian. Environmental protections are fundamental to ensuring the Territory's future sustainability. Yet this budget reflects a failure to invest adequately in these protections. The reduction in water investment is particularly concerning, Madam Speaker. The Territory Water Plan is one of the biggest budget losers. It is a comprehensive plan built on consultation with communities, with industries, reflecting insights, concerns and aspirations of all Territorians when it comes to the protection, quality and security of water in the Northern Territory. We know, Madam Speaker, that the Minister for the Environment doesn't care about water. When it comes to water, he's shown his true colours are aligned with the values of the CLP and would rather give water to his mates than protect it for future generations. This budget cut, Madam Speaker, also goes to looking in other areas. Yet this budget cut of funding to the Darwin Harbour wastewater management strategy, water resources and security. This is short-sighted thinking, jeopardises both the environment and the capacity for agencies to meet their basic responsibilities when it comes to making sure Territorians have their basic human rights of access to safe drinking water are fulfilled. I could go on, Madam Speaker, and talk about this, but there are so many other areas to talk about. When we talk about the lack of investment being seen by this government in the arts is deeply upsetting, particularly given the vital role the creative community plays in fostering cultural pride, community connection and economic growth. How can this government boast the success of our festival seasons and yet not provide much-needed funding to artists and communities that perform the work at those festivals? The Territory's artists deserve better. Madam Speaker, I must also acknowledge the lack of new money for Aboriginal Ranger grants. Madam Speaker, this is absolutely important. Rangers do an amazing job across the Northern Territory, Madam Speaker. They help with fire seasons, creating fire breaks. They help with maintaining country. They help with invasive weed species, Madam Speaker. The Aboriginal Ranger Grant Program was an absolutely integral and successful program here in the Northern Territory, Madam Speaker. That was a program that was a commitment of the last Labor government for a 4-year process. During the 2024 election campaign, Madam Speaker, certainly Labor committed that if we were re-elected, that program would be renewed. I also note, Madam Speaker, that it was the CLP government that made the same commitment at the last election, Madam Speaker. And what we've seen in this budget is absolute, complete betrayal of an election commitment that the CLP made to Aboriginal Rangers across the Northern Territory, Madam Speaker. The CLP government said, we will honour that commitment. We will provide $12 million of funding to the Aboriginal Ranger Grant programs if we are elected. And they lied, Madam Speaker, because we've seen today, we've heard from the Environment Minister that they are not going to continue that important funding, that they have broken that election promise, Madam Speaker. And, Madam Speaker, I just want to quote the Treasurer, who at the time was the Shadow Minister for Parks and Rangers, Bill Yan, who said in the Central Australian today, that an elected CLP government will match the election commitment made by Labor. The CLP remains committed to the Aboriginal Ranger Grants program, and if we are elected, we will fully fund the program with $12 million over 4 years, Mr Yan said. And, Madam Speaker, I seek leave to place this on the parliamentary record.
Is leave granted? All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Leave is granted.
That is an important matter to put on the public record to demonstrate that the Environment Minister, Josh Burgoyne, the member for Breitling, who continually comes in here and says he's the most green-credentialed person of the government, that he cares about the environment, is absolutely telling porky pies. He has removed environmental protections. He has removed merits review processes. He is now changing water allocations. He has defunded environmental groups. He has caused absolute carnage to the Northern Territory's environment, and then he comes in this budget and strips Indigenous rangers. For a party that talks big on providing economic opportunity and job creation, you have a big F for fail. Cutting ranger funding means people will lose jobs. People in remote communities will lose jobs because of your cuts. It shows that this government, the CLP government, don't actually care about people living in remote communities. Because if they did, the member for Barkly, who is also the housing minister, would have stood up in cabinet and said, "You're not touching that $12 million, but he didn't, because we've seen the cut today. When there are bushfires, like the member for Barkly talks about, like the Environment Minister, Josh Burgoyne, who talks about the devastating bushfires that went through the West Max, who do you think was out there helping? Aboriginal rangers. Who are you doing a disservice today? Aboriginal rangers. Cutting their funding causes harm for everyone in the Northern Territory. There are not additional people out there to help with fire breaks. There are not additional people out there to help with the removal of gamba grass, of buffel grass across the Northern Territory. And it's because of you. You could not provide the funding. Now, the member for Nelson loves to tell a good porky pie, and he'll say that the funding was cut. The funding was part of an election commitment for 4 solid years, and at the end of that commitment, Labor had said we will renew that again for another 4 years. The CLP, the Treasurer now, the former Shadow Minister for Parks and Wildlife, Bill Yan, the member for Namatjira, a remote member, actually said publicly, no, we're going to fund it. We're actually going to agree to Labor's election commitment and we're going to fund it. What does that equal, member for Nelson, Deputy Chief Minister? A broken election promise. You have broken another promise to Territorians. You just love breaking promises. You thought that no one would pick up on this. Well, they have. And I can tell you firsthand, rangers across the Northern Territory are absolutely disappointed in this CLP government. They are absolutely disappointed that they are having their funding cut. It is absolutely disgraceful. You should be doing better. You want to create jobs, don't cut jobs. Cutting funding will cut jobs. It will mean loss of jobs for Aboriginal rangers across the Northern Territory. It was one thing that we could actually say this government is actually doing something proactive in the Aboriginal affairs space, but you cut it. Now let's move on to housing, because we've had the member for Fanny Bay, we've had the member for Karama, the member for Drysdale all get up and talk about ghettos. Ghettos, ghettos, ghettos. Well, your government is creating more ghettos with a $100 million cut from repairs and maintenance. What do you think that equals? More derelict houses in your electorates, because your government hasn't put enough money in the budget to fix them. So what does that mean for people across the Northern Territory? More empty houses in suburbs of Alice Springs, because the government is going to turn around and say, we've got no money to fix them, so members just put up with them and leave them, and you're going to end up with more spaces in our suburbs that are going to be left derelict, left damaged and not fixed. What does that mean in the bush? That means that people in the bush are going to go months without repairs when wear and tear has caused things to break. That's what that's going to mean. It's a direct hit for people in the Territory. And the Minister for Remote Housing, again, doesn't have a big voice in the budget cabinet room. A $100 million cut. All of your members of the government are going to be jumping up and down, kicking and screaming when you've got all these empty houses in your electorate and they look absolutely terrible, and then people are going in there and squatting. You've got no one to blame but yourselves. You cut $100 million from the budget. We have to go back to Alice Springs in the suburbs of Breitling, Araluen, Namatjira and Gwodja, and we'll see direct the impact of your failure to deliver in the housing space. There's limited money for community housing and social housing. And you're going to then stand up and jump up and down. I can bet your bottom dollar there will be a Treasurer's advance and there'll be a mid-year budget, because you're going to have to fix the problem that you have created, and that is by not funding housing appropriately. We're seeing it clear as day, Madam Speaker. We absolutely need to see that investment going forward. No one is denying that. The Minister for Housing has made it very clear about people being accountable for their actions and the appropriate processes to get revenue back into housing. But by simply just tying your hands behind your back and saying, we're just going to leave those empty. Or, Madam Speaker, what that says is that $100 million cut to repairs and maintenance and derelict housing is code for CLP. It's ugly, it's damaged. Oh, we don't have any money. Oh, we're going to sell it and not replenish housing stock. And by that default situation, we're going to try and move the problem somewhere else. That is essentially what this does. So I actually think that this $100 million cut is a deliberate attempt, because there's probably a number of members in this Assembly who are whinging about public housing tenants. And rather than work with them, and rather than support them, and rather than actually try and get in and do intensive support, just let the house get down to a terrible state, let it go empty, let it go derelict, and then we'll either knock it down or we'll sell it, because you're not going to have the money to fix it. Now, Madam Speaker, we're seeing again $300,000 cut to the Anti-Discrimination Commission. We know that this government has its eyes on the Anti-Discrimination Commission and the Act, and they want to do work there. We're absolutely seeing that. That is going to hinder the Anti-Discrimination Commission's ability to be able to provide important protections for vulnerable Territorians, Madam Speaker. And again, we are seeing these cuts right across the place. This is serious stuff, Madam Speaker. Absolute serious. I've spoken about those cuts to the Aboriginal Justice Agreement and the direct impact that that's going to have. Now, I know a few members of this Assembly have actually had the opportunity to go to the ATC in Alice Springs and in Groote Eylandt. Fantastic, great. No money in this budget for another alternative to custody, another place for the court to send people to help people get their life back on track and change. There's money in the budget to expand the prison estate, but there's no money that I can see for new work camps, for getting people out, setting up work camps like the successful Barclay work camp, great work camp, important. We've heard in this chamber people talking about the money for peacekeeping and mediation. That is not the work of this government. Absolutely not. That is the work of Indigenous Affairs Minister Mullendery McCarthy renegotiating the Northern Territory remote Aboriginal investment. That's what that money is. That is money that was absolutely created in response to calls from myself and the member for Mulka around needing to have greater peacekeeping measures in our remote communities and looking at how we can de-escalate situations in our community. Now, we absolutely know and acknowledge, Madam Speaker, that I think it is 71 or 73% of the Territory's budget is Commonwealth funding. We understand that there are challenges around self-generated revenue in the Northern Territory, Madam Speaker, and we absolutely willing to work with the government on innovative ways that do it, but they don't come at the cost of providing important services to all Territorians, because that is absolutely important. The NT rate is a significant portion of money coming into the Northern Territory each and every year, and it does provide money for police. It does provide additional funding for peacekeeping, mediation, for health services, for education, and it is an important program. And we absolutely are very thankful that that agreement has been signed again. We're very thankful for the Commonwealth Government coming on board with the former Labor government to renegotiate the education agreement so that we could absolutely see Territory schools fully funded across the Northern Territory. There has been a long-standing conversation between the Northern Territory Government and the Commonwealth around appropriate baseline funding. That continues. Important conversations to have. Certainly, Madam Speaker, these are all important areas. But again, we have seen significant decreases in important areas when, again, we know how important water is for each and every Territorian. We're seeing significant cuts by the CLP government in this space. It is harmful. We're seeing a deduction of support and resourcing when it comes to the Territory's screen industry. Now, I'm from the beautiful place of Central Australia, as there are many members in this chamber who are. We come from the place that produces probably some of, if not Australia's most talented Aboriginal filmmakers, along with so many other Centralians who are absolutely incredible at what they do. Having a strong and functional screen territory is absolutely important, and we need to do it. We have heard calls in the media from people from the screen industry, so disappointed, pleading with this government to not reduce the support and the resourcing for them. We also see and hear those calls have been ignored. So the Minister for Tourism can stand up here and smile and say she's going to watch all these amazing films like The Territory. But in actual fact, by her own work, she is reducing the support and the resource to produce amazing quality productions like that, Madam Speaker. That's what we're getting with this budget. Now, I want to acknowledge that in this budget, there are a number of key roads that the government have spooked. They're Commonwealth-funded roads, and we were able to negotiate when we were in government the funding partnership between those, because in other jurisdictions it is a lot higher, the state contribution, than the territories. And we were able to negotiate, back then it was an 80-20%, so that these roads that we're seeing across the territory are important roads. They're connecting roads, they're industry roads, they're community roads. They are important roads to link families together. But we mustn't forget there needs to be money in the infrastructure budget so that the Minister, the Treasurer, the Member for Namatjira can make sure that roads are being looked after in the bush. Roads like the Tijikala Road, roads like the Papunya and Kintore roads, roads like the Sandover. These are all important roads for thousands of Territorians. There needs to be money in the budget to make sure that they can continue to access those roads in and out of town, because it is absolutely important for them to be able to commute in and out. But we know when these roads are not looked after, people become stuck. They become stuck in our towns, they become stuck with family, they become stuck in community. And that can help sometimes perpetuate those issues that we see in our community, because countrymen want to go home, but these roads are not good. And when you don't have a lot of money, you don't have a big flash car, so you see these cars get worn out really quickly. We need to continue that rolling investment on these remote roads, Madam Speaker, because it is really, really important. We're hearing from community members in Santa Teresa community that the Territory Government is yet to actually start work on the Santa Teresa Road, a road that Marion Scrimminger, the member for Lingiari, got money for, to do that road, to fix that road. That road will be sealed not by the success of this government, Madam Speaker, but by the success of the hard work and advocacy of Marion Scrimminger, the member for Lingiari. Madam Speaker, understanding Order 43, I can see that everyone's really happy for me to continue, so I might ask for an extension.
Is an extension granted?
Thank you.
It is granted, Member for Gwaja. Everyone wants to continue to listen to your speech.
Thank you. I know that the Assembly is very excited. So I can pick up on the interjection, so excited. Thank you, government members. Thank you. Thank you. So, Madam Speaker, this is important, and I do absolutely, again, acknowledge the contribution by the government in the DV space. It's absolutely important. It's absolutely welcomed. There's absolutely a trip that we should be all taking to lobby Canberra for more money for domestic and family violence. Absolutely, Madam Speaker. But we need to make sure that we don't forget people in the bush, because the bush deserve the same level of access to services as people living in towns, in cities and areas. We want to see that investment. We want to see investment in homelands. We want to see investment in outstations. We want to see investment in remote communities. We don't want to see people waiting long periods of time to get their air conditioners fixed when it is 40 degrees outside. We don't want to see community members calling the Department of Housing, reporting when taps have been leaking because the washers have broken inside them or worn out, and they're waiting weeks to get their tap replaced, Madam Speaker. And I know that these are true stories because I have had my own countrymen from my beautiful electorate of Gwaja ring me up and say, Japananga, we're still waiting for housing to fix our taps. So then I write to the Housing Department to help try and move that on. And then they come back a week later. Japananga, I'm still waiting for that tap. Now, if the Environment Minister was serious about water security and the Housing Minister was serious about responding to repairs and maintenance requests, they would be getting onto that quick smart. Imagine how much water we could save if we had responsive repairs and maintenance being done in our remote communities. Not a cut of $100 million or thereof, but imagine if we were doing that work. Madam Speaker, the Territory actually has a good story to tell when it comes to the future of housing, because there is that National Partnership Agreement where the government have signed on to build 270 houses a year. That is a big milestone, but I'm going to give some credit where credit is due. I think that if there was anyone over on that side of the government who could actually put in the hard work and get it done, is my mate from Barclay. I said I'd give credit where it was due, and I think when it comes to housing, he's passionate. I did say to the member for Barclay, old boy, make sure you don't just make Barclay beautiful, come over to Gwaja too. So I am looking forward to seeing a number of houses opened and handed over to countrymen in Gwaja as part of this National Partnership Agreement. I'm looking forward to the member for Barclay sharing the opportunity to hand over some of those houses with the wonderful Marion Scrimminger or the wonderful Senator Mullendeary McCarthy, the Minister for Aboriginal Affairs, who is co-funding this program, because this is how we change lives, building more houses. Because when we build more houses, we provide more opportunity. And, Madam Speaker, this is particularly important when it comes to child protection. I'm not sure if it's the case anymore, but when I was the Housing Minister a fair while ago, we had an agreement in place across Territory families, when housing and families were together, that we tried to prioritise housing allocations for people who worked, for people who were looking after a senior or who wanted to bring a senior back home to community and out of aged care facilities, for people who had lots of children to make sure that they had a home for the first time, where they each had a bedroom or they could share a room and they could get a good night's sleep so they could go to school the next day. And importantly, the next part, Madam Speaker, was we were able to work across and see that when we were able to allocate a house to a community member who was able to be a kinship carer we were able to complete the reunification process of a child who was in the out-of-home care system because they had a safe, secure and affordable home in a remote community with their family to help continue the love, the care for that young person. So it is incredibly important. The Northern Territory Correctional Services is a big part of the budget. It's been the big part of the budget for a number of years now, and they do a fantastic job. They absolutely do. I am concerned that I'm hearing from a number of correctional services officers that they're considering leaving because they don't feel safe going to work in the current climate. Now, I've said to them, look, there's money in the budget. You do need to see what that will deliver in terms of capital infrastructure around that area. But what I do realise, and I actually again want to acknowledge the government is investing and continuing on from previous governments of all persuasions over the last 20 years, we need to continue investment into rehabilitation programs. Now, when I was the Correctional Services Minister, we did sign an MOU with Charles Darwin University, and I know that there are a number of people in this chamber who've done a trade. And what we want to do is make sure that we get the foundations ready for people who are in prison to get the appropriate checks and clearances, to get their cards, to be able to go back out and jump in the workforce, to undertake literacy and numeracy. It is important. I am also looking forward to seeing the commitment of this government being rolled out around men's behavioural change programs. Absolutely fantastic programs being delivered in the top end by Catholic Care, and certainly an amazing one being delivered in Central Australia by Tangentyere. Amazing programs, really, really important programs. We've seen the success of them where men who were referred to the program, even when they finish, they want to continue to be involved in that program. They want to continue to bring in other men to be part of that program, and they want to become mentors and take that on. That's incredibly important. I think that there's an opportunity, Housing Minister, for us to look at public housing complexes right across the Northern Territory, and as people do vacate those, we should be looking at working across with the Minister for the Prevention of Domestic and Family Violence, and can we use some of those for transitional accommodation? As women leave shelters, they have nowhere to go. Can we turn some of these complexes in our communities that have become problem complexes to be places where we can transition women from our women's shelters into a secure community that has another caretaker living on site to see behaviours, to be able to identify when things might be getting tense, might be escalating and might be growing. These are opportunities that we've all got certainly to look at and certainly to put some consideration in. So, Madam Speaker, this is the Country Liberal Party's first budget. I acknowledge that there is, there's a cabinet that's done a lot of work. They've certainly, I guess, had to do a lot of work while the Treasurer was out catching a barra. They've done what they think is a good job. I absolutely can say being in budget cabinet of any government is always hard. You've always got to look at what you can and can't do and what you might have to try and work around to make it, be refined. I actually want to acknowledge that work that the CLP have had to do with their budget. I don't agree with all of it, but I don't have to. We'll see when estimates comes up around how their projections are for the future. This is an opportunity for us to look at that, to see it, and then to see how they can deliver on their commitments with their allocations, noting that there are public servants in the environment space who have reached out and said that there is just not enough money for them to be able to deliver their core functions responsibly at the moment when it comes to baseline data around environmental protections, weed management and water allocations. It is an absolute shame that there has been such a cut to the environment when we have, as he refers to himself, the most green credentialed member of that side cutting that funding. So certainly I know that the people in Breitling will be keeping an eye out. I certainly looked very eagerly at the federal election results in that electorate to see just how well other people's parties were polling against the CLP. So, it should serve as a warning to the member for Breitling to get serious about when it comes to the environment, to get serious when it comes to funding environmental protection organisations to care for country, and to get serious when it comes to positive environmental reform. Clearly, those calls have been ignored to date, but, we live in hope that he might actually listen one day, Madam Speaker.
Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move that debate be adjourned.
The question is